My name is Sarah, I'm 58 years old, and my own daughter shoved me and my husband off a cliff. Before I tell you how we survived and exposed a secret she'd kept for 20 years, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I always believed I had a perfect family. A good solid American family. I was a high school literature teacher for 30 years, and my husband David could build anything with his 2 hands. We had a home he'd renovated himself, a quiet life in Asheville, and what I thought were 2 wonderful children. I was wrong. I was dead wrong. The air on that mountain ledge was biting cold, the kind that steals your breath and makes your bones ache. It was our 35th wedding anniversary, and our daughter Jessica had insisted on this trip. A family hike in the Blue Ridge Mountains. A celebration. It's perfect, she chirped, her husband Mark nodding beside her. Now standing there, the wind whipping my hair across my face, I had to agree. The view was breathtaking. A rolling sea of autumn colors under a crisp blue sky. Okay, one more picture, Jessica said, holding up her phone. Mom, Dad, I want one of just you 2. With the whole valley behind you. David wrapped his arm around my waist, his familiar warmth a small comfort against the chill. We smiled the way you do for 1,000 family photos over a lifetime. Perfect, Jessica said. Now just a little further back. I want to get the full panorama. Her voice was sweet as honey, but there was something sharp underneath, something I hadn't let myself hear until it was too late. David's hand tightened on mine. We took a slow, careful step back. The gravel crunched under my boots. I could feel the empty space behind me, the sheer drop. Another step. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. Felt wrong. That's it, Mark said, his voice strangely tight. He was standing beside Jessica, his own phone out, but he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at us. And then it happened. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't an accident. It was a shove. Hard, deliberate, and final. I felt 2 sets of hands slam into our backs. A sudden brutal force that sent us stumbling over the edge. The world turned upside down. There was no time to scream. There was only the wind screaming in my ears, the horrifying feeling of weightlessness, and the sight of the jagged rocks rushing up to meet us. I saw David's face, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. The impact was an explosion of pure agony. I heard a sickening crack that I knew was my own bone. Pain wasn't just a feeling. It was a white-hot light that consumed everything. The world went dark for a second, then came rushing back in a wave of nausea and blinding pain. I felt something warm and sticky trickling down my temple. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. Through the fog of agony as I lay twisted on the rocks below, I heard my husband's voice. It wasn't a shout, but a desperate, ragged whisper right next to my ear. A command that cut through the pain. Don't move, Sarah. Play dead. His words didn't make sense, but my body obeyed. I went limp, letting my eyes fall half open, staring blankly at the gray sky. And in that moment, as I fought to keep my breathing shallow and silent, I knew. The fall wasn't the worst part of this. The crushing impact wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the truth we were about to hear from the top of that cliff. But to understand how we ended up here, broken at the bottom of a ravine while our daughter stood at the top, believing we were dead, you have to understand what happened 20 years ago. You have to understand the night our family truly broke for the first time. Our life in Asheville was quiet. The kind of quiet that sinks into your bones and makes you feel safe. We lived in a 2-story craftsman house that David had poured his heart into, with a wide front porch where we'd sit in the evenings and watch the fireflies. He had his workshop out back, always filled with the clean, sharp scent of sawdust and varnish. I had my garden, my sanctuary, where I'd spend hours with my hands in the dirt, coaxing life from the rich North Carolina soil. Our life was built on simple, solid things. Hard work, honesty, and family. At least that's what I told myself. Our son Ben was the sunshine of that life. He was one of those kids who was born smiling. He had David's easy laugh and my love of books. He was charismatic, protective, and had a fierce sense of what was right and wrong. When he was little, he'd bring me fistfuls of dandelions from the yard, telling me they were golden treasures just for me. As he got older, he talked endlessly about becoming an architect, sketching out blueprints for houses on napkins at the dinner table. I'm going to build you and Dad a house on the coast one day, he'd say, his eyes shining. A place where you can watch the ocean and never worry about anything again. He was our golden boy, our future. And then there was Jessica. 5 years younger than Ben, she was his opposite in every way. Where Ben was open, Jessica was closed. Where he was loud and joyful, she was quiet and observant. She had David's dark hair but none of his warmth. From a young age, she watched everything from the sidelines, her eyes missing nothing. I remember one Christmas, Ben got the new bicycle he'd been begging for, and Jessica got the beautiful dollhouse she'd wanted. Ben ran outside to ride his bike, shouting with glee. Jessica just sat in the living room, carefully arranging the tiny furniture in her dollhouse, her face unreadable. Later that day, I found one of the wheels on Ben's new bike had been deliberately loosened. We thought it was just a manufacturing defect. Now I see it differently. I told myself it was just sibling rivalry, a normal part of growing up. I didn't want to see the cold, calculating nature that was already taking root. I excused her quietness as shyness, her watchfulness as thoughtfulness. A mother sees what she wants to see, and I wanted to see a happy, perfect family, so I painted over the cracks. I ignored the way she'd look at Ben when he got praised, a flicker of something dark and resentful in her eyes. I dismissed the small, mean-spirited things she'd do, the accidental spills on his homework, the toys of his that would mysteriously go missing. We were a family. That's what mattered. We had Sunday dinners at the big oak table David built. Ben would fill the room with stories about his friends and his plans, while Jessica would mostly listen, pushing food around on her plate. David and I would look at our 2 children, and our hearts would feel full. We were so proud. We thought we had done everything right. We had given them love, stability, a good home. We had no idea, not the slightest clue, that we were living in a beautifully constructed lie. A house with a faulty foundation that was about to crumble and bury us all. We thought the small jealousies were harmless, but they weren't. They were seeds. Seeds of a bitterness so profound it would eventually demand blood. I'd spent so much time tending my garden, but I never once saw the viper hiding in the grass of my own home. I thought Jessica's differences were just part of her personality. I never imagined that behind those quiet eyes was a void of envy and greed. A chasm so deep it was about to swallow our beloved son whole. The night it happened started like any other Tuesday. Ben, who was 22 and in his final year of college for architecture, was heading out to meet some friends for a study group. He poked his head into the kitchen before he left. "Don't wait up," he said, flashing that brilliant smile. "Love you guys." Those were the last words we ever heard him say. We woke up the next morning to a silence that felt wrong. Ben's car was gone, and his bed hadn't been slept in. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. David started making calls, his voice tight with a forced calm. I called the campus, his friends. No one had seen him since he left the library the night before. Jessica said she'd been in her room studying for a midterm and hadn't heard him come in. I remember noticing how she wouldn't look me in the eye, how she kept wringing her hands, but I was too consumed by panic to question it. The police found his car later that afternoon, parked at the trailhead of a popular hiking spot in the Pisgah National Forest. It was a place Ben loved, a place he'd go to clear his head. A search party was organized. David went with them, his face a grim, stoic mask. I stayed by the phone, my body trembling, praying for a call that would tell me this was all a terrible mistake. The call came just after sunset. It was David. His voice was hollow, broken. "They found him, Sarah. They said he must have gone for a walk after studying, maybe to watch the stars. They said he must have slipped on the path, which was notoriously treacherous after dark, and fallen into the ravine. A tragic accident." That was the official story. That was the story that was printed in the local paper. The story that friends and family whispered with sad, shaking heads at his funeral. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and hushed condolences. I felt like I was moving underwater, the world muted and distant. I leaned on David, my body too weak to stand on its own. He was my rock, but I could feel him trembling. I thought it was just grief. Now I know it was the weight of a horrific secret. And Jessica. She stood beside us, pale and silent. She didn't cry. Not a single tear. At the time I thought she was in shock, that her grief was too deep for tears. What a fool I was. Weeks turned into a month. The casseroles stopped coming. The sympathy cards dwindled. We were left alone with the gaping hole in our lives. One night I found David sitting in Ben's empty room, just staring at the wall. I sat down beside him, and that's when he told me a part of the story, a lie wrapped around a kernel of truth. He told me Jessica had come to him the day after the funeral, hysterical. She confessed that she had been there that night. She and Ben had argued. She said Ben had found out she'd taken $50 from my purse to buy a concert ticket and he was furious, threatening to tell us. In her version of the story, they were shouting at each other near the edge of the ravine. She claimed he grabbed her arm, and she pulled away, and in that struggle he lost his footing and fell. "It was an accident, Dad," she had cried, according to David. "I didn't mean for it to happen." And David, looking at his one remaining child, shattered by the loss of his son, terrified of losing her too, to prison, to the guilt, made a choice. He chose to believe her. He chose to protect her. He told me this story, his voice thick with shame, and I believed him too. I was a grieving mother. The idea that one of my children could have intentionally harmed the other was too monstrous to comprehend. An accident I could learn to live with. A murder I could not. So we buried the truth, or what we thought was the truth, along with our son. We agreed in a quiet, unspoken pact to never speak of it again, to protect Jessica, to try and salvage what was left of our broken family. David had buried that truth to protect our daughter. He didn't know he wasn't protecting a grieving child. He was nurturing a monster. In the aftermath of Ben's death, a strange thing happened. Jessica blossomed. It was as if the shadow of her older brother had been lifted, allowing her to finally step into the sun. She became the perfect, doting daughter. She helped me in the garden. She'd sit with David in his workshop, asking questions about his woodworking. She finished college, got a degree in business, and married Mark, a man who seemed so steady and reliable. He called me Mom from the day they met, and his easy warmth filled a space in our home we didn't realize was so empty. When they had their 2 children, our grandchildren, it felt like a second chance at happiness. Life, it seemed, was giving back some of what it had taken. We poured all our love into those children, and into Jessica, the daughter who had stayed, the one who was building a life right here in Asheville, close to us. She opened her own boutique furniture store downtown, and we were so proud. She seemed to have it all. The web was spun so subtly we never even felt the strands. It started a few months ago. Jessica and Mark came over for dinner, and they brought up the topic of our finances. It was all cloaked in the language of love and concern. "Mom, Dad, you've worked so hard your whole lives," Jessica began, her voice soft and earnest. "We just want to make sure everything is simplified for you. You shouldn't have to worry about bills and online banking at your age." Mark chimed in, smooth as silk. "There's this great new software, Sarah. It links all your accounts, helps you track everything. We use it ourselves. We could set it up for you on your computer. It would only take a few minutes." I felt a flash of pride. My daughter so responsible. My son-in-law so thoughtful. Of course we said yes. We sat beside Mark at our little desk in the kitchen as he clicked and typed, explaining how it all worked. We thanked them profusely. We felt so cared for, so loved. We had no idea we had just handed them the keys to our entire life. The software they installed wasn't just a financial tool. It was spyware. Keylogging software that recorded every password we typed, every email we wrote. They had access to our bank accounts, our retirement funds, our credit card statements. They saw every dollar we spent, every penny we saved. They were watching us. The discovery came by accident. Our old printer finally died, and I bought a new wireless one. While I was fumbling through the network settings on our computer, I saw a program running in the background I didn't recognize. Data Stream Connect, it was called. Curious, I Googled it on my phone. The search results made my blood run cold. It was a sophisticated remote monitoring program, marketed to businesses to track employee activity, but often used for more sinister purposes. It was virtually undetectable to the average user. It captured screenshots, logged keystrokes, and sent a detailed report to a remote user every single hour. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. For a moment I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a virus? But I knew with a sickening certainty who had put it there. They had installed it that night under the guise of helping us. They weren't just concerned. They were conducting surveillance. For how long? What had they seen? What were they looking for? The feeling of violation was overwhelming. It was like finding out a stranger had been living in your attic, watching you through a crack in the ceiling. Except this wasn't a stranger. This was our daughter. We thought she was taking care of us. But the truth was she was watching us like a spider watches a fly caught in its web, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The spyware was a silent alarm, a warning that something was deeply wrong, but we still didn't understand the full scope of it. We didn't confront them. How could we? How do you ask your own daughter why she's spying on you? The accusation felt too monstrous, too insane. So we watched and we waited, and the squeeze began. It started the week we mentioned to Jessica that we needed to call our lawyer to update our will. Her eyes lit up, not with grief at the thought of our mortality, but with a sharp, focused interest that was unnerving. "That's such a good idea," she said immediately. "You know, Mark and I were talking about the inheritance. For the kids, of course. It would probably be simplest if you just made us the sole heirs. That way, we can manage the college funds and trusts for the grandkids without any legal complications. It's just cleaner." Cleaner. The word hung in the air, cold and sterile. She was talking about what would happen after we were gone as if she were organizing a closet. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the living room. "But what about Carol?" I asked, referring to my sister. We had always planned to leave her a small portion. Jessica waved a dismissive hand. "Aunt Carol is fine. This is about family, Mom. About keeping Ben's legacy and your legacy together for the kids." Using Ben's name felt like a violation, a weapon she was using against us. Next came the pressure about the house. It was relentless. "This place is just too big for two people," she'd say on every visit, her eyes scanning our home not with affection, but with the cold appraisal of a real estate agent. "The stairs are a hazard. What if one of you fell? We're so worried." Mark would nod gravely. "The upkeep alone must be a fortune. Selling now while the market is high would be the smart move. You could get a lovely, secure condo downtown." They made it sound like our home, the place where we'd raised our children, the place where every corner held a memory, was a death trap. They were trying to frighten us out of our own lives. The breaking point for me, the moment the veil of denial was completely ripped away, was over something small and deeply personal. David had a prize stamp collection. It wasn't worth a fortune in money, but it was his life's passion, something his own father had started with him. He kept it in a beautiful glass case in his study. One Sunday, Jessica was helping me bring drinks into the study where David was showing the albums to the grandkids. As she walked past the case, she tripped. A full glass of dark red wine flew from her hand, arcing through the air and splashing directly onto a priceless, irreplaceable sheet of early American stamps. The red liquid soaked into the delicate paper instantly, a dark, ugly stain. David let out a cry of pure anguish. "Oh my God!" Jessica shrieked, her hand flying to her mouth. "I'm so sorry. Dad, I'm clumsy, I'm so sorry." Her apology was loud and dramatic, but as I looked at her, I saw it. For a split second before the mask of horror snapped into place, I saw a flicker of triumph in her eyes. A tiny cruel smile. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. It was a calculated act of cruelty, designed to hurt David in a way money couldn't. It was her way of saying nothing you love is safe. I can destroy whatever I want. I felt a hot flash of rage crawl up my neck. I looked at the ruined stamps, at my husband's devastated face, and then at my daughter's false tears. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. She wanted to erase us, to dismantle our lives piece by piece until there was nothing left. And the most terrifying part was that David, worn down by her constant concern, was starting to believe her. I felt like I was losing my husband, my home, and my very grip on reality. The ruined stamp collection was the final straw. That night, after Jessica and her family had left, leaving behind a string of hollow apologies, the house felt heavy with a silence that was more like a scream. David was in his study, sitting in the dark. I didn't turn on the light. I just stood in the doorway, my heart feeling like a block of ice in my chest. "She did it on purpose, David," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the stained album on his desk. "You know she did," I pressed, stepping into the room. "Just like you know this whole business with selling the house isn't about our safety. What is going on? Why are you letting her do this to us?" He finally looked up at me, and his face in the moonlight was a landscape of such profound misery it stole my breath. "You think I don't know?" he said, his voice cracking. "You think I'm blind? Then why?" I cried, the frustration and fear of the past few months boiling over. "Why are you letting her walk all over you? It's like you're afraid of her. I feel like I'm going crazy, David. Am I the only one who sees the person she's become?" That's when he broke. A sound tore from his throat, a sob of pure 20-year-old agony. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking. I had seen my husband cry only twice in our lives. The day his father died, and the day we buried Ben. This was different. This was the sound of a soul collapsing. I knelt beside his chair, my anger evaporating, replaced by a terrible dread. "David," I whispered. "What is it? What aren't you telling me?" He took a ragged breath and finally the full unvarnished truth came pouring out. A torrent of guilt and horror he had held back for 2 decades. He told me about that night again, but this time there were no filters. He hadn't just heard them arguing. He had followed them. He'd had a bad feeling all day. A sense that Jessica's resentment toward her brother had been festering into something dangerous. He hid behind a cluster of boulders a short distance away, close enough to see and hear everything. He saw the argument escalate. He saw Ben holding a piece of paper, a bank statement he later realized, and shouting, "You've been stealing from them, Jess. From Mom and Dad." He saw the pure venom on Jessica's face as she screamed back at him, calling him the golden boy, the favorite who always got everything. And then he saw it. It wasn't a struggle. It wasn't a slip. With a guttural scream of rage, Jessica planted her hands squarely in the center of Ben's chest and shoved with all her might. David described the look of utter shock and betrayal on Ben's face as he stumbled backward, his arms flailing, before disappearing over the edge into the darkness. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a scream. My mind reeled. Murder. Not an accident. Cold-blooded murder. But why? I choked out. Why didn't you say anything? This was the part that truly destroyed me. "Because she saw me," he whispered. His eyes squeezed shut as if reliving the moment. "Right after he went over, she turned, and she saw me standing there. Her face, it was pure panic. And then she screamed, 'If you tell, I'll jump. I swear to God, Dad, I'll jump right now. You'll lose us both tonight.'" He was trapped. A father frozen in an impossible choice. His son was gone. His daughter was threatening to follow. In that moment of absolute horror and grief, he made a decision that would haunt him forever. He ran to her, pulled her away from the edge, and agreed to her frantic, desperate plea to call it an accident. He became an accomplice to his own son's murder to save his daughter. And there was more. The reason for the recent pressure, the spying, the squeeze. David, finally suspicious himself, had done some quiet digging. He'd hired a private investigator. Jessica and Mark weren't just struggling. They were drowning in debt. Her boutique was a failure, and they owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to lenders, some of whom were not the kind of people you could ignore. Our inheritance wasn't a windfall for them. It was a lifeline. It was the only thing that could save them. Sitting there in the dark, the whole world shifted on its axis. I wasn't just living with a grieving husband and a difficult daughter. I was living with an accessory to murder and a killer. And just as that horrifying reality settled in, the phone on the desk buzzed. It was a text from Jessica. My hand trembled as I read it aloud. "Hope you and Dad aren't still upset about the wine. I have the most wonderful idea for your anniversary next weekend." The text message glowed in the dark room, obscene in its cheerfulness. An anniversary trip. A hike in the mountains. My blood ran cold. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. They knew we were suspicious. The spyware must have told them. The spilled wine was a test, and our reaction had confirmed their fears. Now they were accelerating their plan. "We can't go," I said, my voice shaking. "We'll say I'm sick. We'll say anything." David looked at me, the agony in his eyes now sharpened by a grim resolve. "And then what, Sarah?" he said, his voice low and steady. "They try something else? A gas leak in the house? A break-in that goes wrong? No. If they're going to make a move, I want to see it coming. At least on that mountain we'll know what they're trying to do." His logic was terrifying, but it was sound. We were cornered. We couldn't go to the police. David's confession would make him an accomplice. It would be his word against hers, 20 years after the fact. We had no proof. We were trapped. But if we were going to be trapped, we weren't going down without a fight. The next morning my mind was racing. I couldn't just sit here and wait for our own children to lead us to our slaughter. I needed an insurance policy. My hands trembled as I dialed my sister, Carol. I couldn't tell her the whole truth. She would think I'd lost my mind. But I could plant a seed of doubt. Carol, I began, trying to keep my voice from cracking. I'm a little worried. Jessica and Mark are putting a lot of pressure on us about money, about selling the house. It's gotten intense. Intense how? Carol asked, her voice sharp with concern. Just aggressive, I said, choosing my words carefully. And they're taking us on a hiking trip this weekend to celebrate our anniversary. It was their idea, and it all feels a bit sudden. I paused. I just want you to know in case anything seems strange. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Okay, Sarah, she finally said slowly. I hear you. Next, I made the call that felt the most important. Frank Miller was David's oldest friend. They'd grown up together, and Frank had served as the county sheriff for 30 years before retiring. He was sharp, practical, and the most trustworthy man I knew. Frank, it's Sarah, I said when he answered. Sarah, how are you? I haven't heard from you in ages. I took a deep breath. Frank, I need to ask you something, and I need you to just listen. I know this is going to sound crazy. I told him a sanitized version of the story. I told him about the financial pressure, the constant arguments, the feeling that we were being manipulated. I told him about the sudden hiking trip. I couldn't bring myself to say the words, I think my daughter is going to murder us, but I didn't have to. Sarah, Frank said, his voice losing all its folksy charm and becoming deadly serious. Where are they taking you? Exactly. I gave him the name of the trail. Okay, he said. Here's what I want you to do. Turn on the location sharing on your phone. Send it to my number right now. Don't turn it off. I'll keep an eye on it. If you don't call me by Sunday night, I'm sending people up there. Frank, I feel like I'm being paranoid. Let me be the judge of that, he cut in. You call me the second you get back. You understand? Yes, I whispered, a wave of relief washing over me. We weren't completely alone. That night, David and I sat at the kitchen table and laid out our own desperate plan. We would go. We would act normal. We would play the part of the happy parents on their anniversary trip. But David's phone, fully charged and hidden in an inside pocket of his jacket, would be recording audio the entire time. If they try anything, he said, his jaw set. If they even hint at what they did to Ben or what they plan to do to us, we'll have it. It's our only shot, Sarah. To get proof. For Ben. The word proof hung in the air. That's what this was about now. We weren't just trying to survive. We were trying to get justice for the son we had failed so horribly 20 years ago. When Jessica called to confirm the trip, I forced a cheerful tone into my voice. We'd love to, honey. It sounds wonderful. As I hung up, I looked at David. We weren't two scared old people being led to the slaughter. We were parents on a mission, walking into the lion's den to hunt for evidence against our own murderous child. And we had no idea if we'd make it back out alive. The car ride up to the mountains was a masterclass in surrealism. Jessica was behind the wheel, humming along to some pop song on the radio. Mark sat in the passenger seat, pointing out scenic spots and making cheerful small talk. They were playing their parts perfectly. The loving children treating their parents to a special day out. David and I sat in the back, our smiles feeling like fragile glass masks we were terrified of breaking. Every time Jessica's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, I had to fight the urge to flinch. I could feel the slight weight of David's phone in his jacket pocket, a silent, secret witness to the unfolding horror. The trail I picked is just beautiful this time of year, Jessica announced as we pulled into a small, nearly empty parking area. The leaves are at their peak. I looked around. It was beautiful. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. The trees were a riot of red, orange, and gold. It was the kind of perfect autumn day that should have been filled with joy. For us, it felt like a beautiful painted stage for a tragedy. As we started walking, the charade continued. Mark, ever the enthusiastic son-in-law, walked up ahead, snapping photos with his expensive camera. Look at this view, Sarah. Incredible, he'd call back, pointing towards a distant waterfall. Jessica stayed behind us, a self-appointed shepherd to her flock. You guys doing okay? Don't want you to overdo it, she'd say, her voice dripping with false concern. I could feel her eyes on our backs, not watching out for us but watching us, sizing us up, waiting. We walked for what felt like an eternity. My legs began to ache, and my breathing grew labored. This was part of their plan, I realized. To wear us out. To make us weak and tired, less able to fight back when the time came. About an hour into the hike, we came to a fork in the path. The main trail, wider and well-trodden, continued straight. A smaller, rougher path veered off to the right, marked with a simple sign that read, "Overlook, experienced hikers only." "Oh, let's go this way," Jessica said with sudden excitement. "I've heard the view from this overlook is way better than the main one. It's our little secret." My heart lurched. This was it. The main trail was too public, too safe. They needed isolation. "Jessica, I don't know," I said, trying to sound merely cautious. "That sign says it's for experienced hikers. We're not." "Oh, Mom, don't be silly," she cut in smoothly, already starting down the narrow path. "It's not that bad. We'll be right here with you. We'll take it slow." Mark was already halfway up the path, turning back to grin at us. "Come on. You don't want to miss this, I promise." There was no refusing without revealing our hand. David gave my hand a quick, firm squeeze. "We have to go." We followed them onto the path that I knew in my gut was leading us to our doom. The path was treacherous. Loose rocks shifted under our feet, and we had to use our hands to pull ourselves up steep sections. It was clear this trail was rarely used. It was the perfect place to commit a murder and have it look like a tragic hiking accident. Finally, breathless and exhausted, we reached the top. It was a narrow, flat ledge of rock that jutted out over the valley. The view was, as Jessica had promised, spectacular. But I couldn't see the beauty. All I could see was the sheer 100-foot drop on 3 sides. It was a perfect trap. Isolated. Dangerous. No witnesses. "See," Jessica said, her voice bright. "Wasn't it worth it?" Mark put his arm around her, and they both looked out at the view, then back at us. The smiles on their faces were gone. Their expressions were cold, flat, and utterly devoid of emotion. They looked like strangers. Mark raised his camera. "Smile," he said, and his voice was no longer warm and friendly. It was a command. "This is going to be your last picture." In that frozen moment on the edge of the world, time seemed to slow down. The wind died. The birds went silent. There was only the cold, hard certainty in my daughter's eyes. This was the end she had planned for us. As Mark lowered his camera, Jessica lunged. But David was ready. 20 years of guilt and a week of terrified planning had honed his senses to a razor's edge. He didn't retreat. He met her charge with one of his own. In a move of desperate, paternal fury, he grabbed her wrist. "If we go, you're coming with us," he roared, his voice a sound of pure anguish I had never heard before. Jessica, thrown completely off balance by his resistance, shrieked. She stumbled forward, pulling David with her toward the precipice. Mark yelled her name and lunged for her, grabbing her other arm. The 4 of us became a tangled, teetering mass of limbs on the very lip of the cliff, a macabre dance between life and death. I felt a dizzying lurch as the loose rock under my feet gave way. My grip on David's hand was all that kept me from falling, but our combined weight was too much. Mark lost his footing. For a horrifying second, we were all suspended in a state of impossible gravity, a human chain breaking apart. Then we fell. Together. The sensation of falling is nothing like you imagine. It's not a peaceful floating. It's a violent, chaotic tumbling. The world spinning in a blur of rock and sky. My mind didn't have time for my life to flash before my eyes. There was only one image. Ben's face, the last time I saw him, smiling in the kitchen doorway. I imagined this was what he felt. The shock. The betrayal. The helpless plunge into nothingness. The impact was a brutal final punctuation mark. A symphony of agony. I heard bones snap. I felt a blinding white-hot pain sear through my left arm and shoulder. My head hit something hard, and for a moment, the world dissolved into stars and blackness. Then through the ringing in my ears, through the tidal wave of pain, came David's voice. a lifeline in the wreckage. Don't move, Sarah. Play dead. With a surge of adrenaline that defied all logic and agony, I obeyed. I let my body go completely limp, my head lolled to one side. I forced my breathing into a shallow, imperceptible rhythm. A few feet away I heard a groan. Then another. They had survived too. Jessica? Jess, are you okay? It was Mark's voice, strained with pain. I think my leg is broken, she whimpered. A moment later I heard her crawl, the sound of fabric scraping against rock. There was a long, terrifying silence. I could feel her presence near me, could almost feel her breath. I fought every instinct to flinch, to cry out. They're dead, she finally announced, her voice flat and devoid of the panic from moments before. It was the voice of a physician declaring a time of death. Both of them. Their eyes are open, but they're not breathing. Good, Mark breathed, a disgusting sound of relief and satisfaction. It worked. Of course it worked, she snapped, her voice now laced with bitter anger. Except for the part where we fell to, you idiot. My leg is shattered. They started to argue then, their whispers carrying in the still air of the ravine. They pieced together their story for the authorities. We were taking pictures, a rock crumbled under David's feet. He grabbed for me and we both fell. They, the heroic children, tried to save us, and were tragically pulled over the edge as well. It was perfect. Plausible. Heartbreaking. Every word was a dagger in my heart. And every word was being captured by the silent microphone in David's pocket. They thought they were planning their alibi. They were actually recording their confession. As their voices faded, them dragging themselves away to find help, the silence that fell was profound. We had survived. We had the proof. But we were broken, trapped at the bottom of a canyon, and our murderers were on their way to bring the world down on top of us. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. Time ceased to have meaning at the bottom of that ravine. There was only the throbbing rhythm of pain and the slow, agonizing crawl of the sun across the sliver of sky visible above us. Every breath was a battle. My arm felt like it was on fire, and a dizzying pain pulsed in my head. I could hear David's shallow, ragged breathing nearby. We were alive, but only just. David. I whispered into the silence, my voice a dry crackle. I'm here, he rasped back. My leg. I think it's broken. The phone. It's still in my pocket. I think it's still recording. Hope. It was a tiny, fragile spark in a vast darkness. But what good was proof if we died down here before anyone could find it? My thoughts turned to Frank. Had he gotten my location? Would he understand the urgency? Or would they find Jessica and Mark first, listen to their tragic, well-rehearsed story, and treat us like two unfortunate casualties of a hiking trip gone wrong? It felt like hours later when we heard it. A faint, rhythmic whump 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 in the distance. A helicopter. My heart leaped. Frank. It had to be Frank. He hadn't dismissed my fears. He had listened. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was directly overhead. A deafening roar that echoed off the canyon walls. We heard shouting from above. Then, the sight of ropes being lowered, of figures in bright orange jumpsuits rappelling down the rock face. Help was here. But so was the greatest danger. I could hear Jessica's voice from the top of the cliff, a performance of Oscar-worthy despair. Down there. My parents. Please hurry. I don't know if they're. Her voice broke on a perfectly timed sob. The first rescuer reached us, a young man with a kind, serious face. Ma'am? Sir? Can you hear me? We remained still, our bodies limp, our faces blank. This was the most critical part of the gambit. He knelt beside David first, checking for a pulse. I've got a weak pulse on the male. He's alive. Unresponsive, but alive. He shouted into his radio. Then he came to me. I focused all my energy on slowing my heart, on making my breathing almost non-existent. I felt his fingers press against the side of my neck. He held them there for what felt like an eternity. He leaned his ear close to my mouth. I'm not getting a pulse on the female, he said, his voice grim. He tried again. Wait, maybe. It's thready. Barely there. She's in bad shape. We need to get them out of here now. It had worked. They believed I was on the brink of death, too far gone to be a threat. They would focus their immediate attention on David, who was genuinely in critical condition. My act didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be convincing enough to buy us time. Being strapped into the rescue basket and hoisted into the sky was a surreal experience. I kept my eyes closed, fighting against the instinct to gasp as we were lifted over the abyss. I could hear the paramedics working, their voices a calm, professional murmur of medical terms. And I could hear Jessica. They had brought her and Mark down to be airlifted with us. She was crying, thanking the rescuers, telling them how she and her husband had tried so desperately to save us. She was sitting just feet away from me, weeping over the mother she had just tried to murder. The audacity of it was breathtaking. On the helicopter ride to the hospital, the noise was immense. A paramedic was focused on stabilizing David. Another was checking on me, placing an oxygen mask over my face. Through my slitted eyelids, I could see Jessica watching them, her face a mask of concern. But under the noise of the rotors, as the paramedic turned away for a moment, I saw her lean slightly toward Mark. I couldn't hear what she said, but I could read her lips. 2 words formed with a cold, clear finality. It's done. They thought they had one. They thought they were flying toward a future filled with our money, free from their debts, free from us. They had no idea they were flying straight into a trap, with the evidence that would destroy them hidden in the pocket of the man they thought was dying beside them. The emergency room was controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses swarmed around us, shouting orders, cutting away our clothes, assessing the damage. I was wheeled into one bay, David into another. I had to maintain the act to stay limp and unresponsive, but it was getting harder. My own body was screaming to be heard. A young doctor shone a light in my eyes. Pupils are sluggish. Vitals are all over the place. She sustained a major head trauma. I heard him say to a nurse. They were working on me, trying to save the life they didn't know I was desperately clinging to. Then I heard Jessica's voice at the curtain. Please, doctor. Can we just see her? Just for a moment. To say goodbye. Her voice was thick with fake tears. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Just for a minute. The curtain swished open. I could feel her presence beside the gurney. Her shadow fell over me. I felt her hand, cold and clammy, touch my arm. And then she leaned down, her mouth close to my ear, her breath warm against my skin. Her voice was no longer the performance of a grieving daughter. It was a low, venomous whisper, meant only for me. The mother she believed was already gone. You should have just stayed out of it, Mom, she hissed. You never should have started asking so many questions. That was Ben's mistake, too. My heart stopped. She had just confessed. Again. But this time she wasn't alone. From the corner of my eye, I had seen a young nurse named Maria walk into the bay just as Jessica began to speak. Maria froze, a tray of medical supplies in her hands. Her eyes widened. She had heard it. She had heard every single damning word. Jessica straightened up, oblivious. She gave my arm a final theatrical squeeze and turned to leave. As she walked out, her eyes met Maria's. For a split second I saw a flash of panic on Jessica's face, but then it was gone, replaced by the mask of sorrow. It was too late. The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. After Jessica and Mark were gone, Maria rushed to my side. She looked from me to the hallway, her mind clearly racing. Ma'am, she whispered urgently, her voice trembling slightly. I heard that. I heard what she said. If you can hear me. If you are in danger, squeeze my hand. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I tightened my fingers around hers. It was a faint pressure, but it was enough. Maria gasped. She didn't hesitate. She turned and walked briskly out of the room. Minutes later she returned, not with a doctor, but with a hospital security guard and a man in a rumpled suit who had the unmistakable look of a cop. It was Frank. Sarah, Frank said, his voice low and full of a grim relief. It's over. You can stop pretending now. Slowly, painfully, I opened my eyes. The bright hospital lights were blinding, but the sight of Frank's worried face was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I told them everything. The whole sordid 20-year story. As I spoke, another detective went to David's room. He was conscious now, and he handed over his phone without a word. They played the audio right there. The confession in the ravine was crystal clear. Frank got on his radio. We have them. They're in the main floor waiting room. We watched from the security monitor in the nurses' station. We saw two uniformed officers and Frank walk up to Jessica and Mark, who were accepting condolences from a hospital chaplain. "Jessica and Mark," Frank said, his voice calm and authoritative. "You're under arrest." Jessica's face crumpled in disbelief. "Arrest us? We're the victims here," she cried out, loud enough for the whole waiting room to hear. "Your parents are alive," Frank said, his voice cutting through her act. "And they've told us everything." The color drained from their faces. Mark, in a moment of pure, idiotic panic, blurted out, "That's impossible. We saw them die. They were dead." Checkmate. A full confession in a room full of witnesses, all because he couldn't believe we had outsmarted them. The trial was a formality. Between David's recording, Mark's waiting room confession, my testimony, and the mountain of financial evidence the police uncovered, they didn't stand a chance. They turned on each other, of course, each painting the other as the mastermind. It didn't matter. The jury found them both guilty of first-degree murder for what they did to Ben, and attempted murder for what they did to us. They were sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. It's been a year now. The physical wounds have mostly healed. David walks with a permanent limp, and I have a network of scars on my arm and shoulder that ache when it rains. But those are the easy wounds. The ones on the inside, those may never fully heal. We sold the house in Asheville. There were too many ghosts there. Too many happy memories that had been tainted and twisted into something monstrous. We moved to a small town on the coast, a place where the constant rhythmic sound of the ocean waves helps to soothe the nightmares. We bought a small one-story house, no more stairs. A new home for a new beginning. And we are not alone. After a long and difficult process with Child Protective Services, we were granted full custody of our two grandchildren. They are wonderful, bright, innocent children, and they are the reason we get up in the morning. They know their parents went away to a place where they have to stay for a very, very long time. They don't know why. They are too young to carry the weight of that truth. One day when they are older we will have to tell them. But for now we fill their lives with love, with stability, with the truth of our devotion. We tell them stories about their Uncle Ben, the brave and kind man they never got to meet. Sometimes I look at old photographs, pictures of Jessica as a little girl, smiling a gap-toothed grin, and I try to pinpoint the exact moment when the person I knew vanished, replaced by the monster she became. But there is no single moment. It was a slow erosion, a quiet poisoning of the soul that we, in our loving blindness, failed to see. Love can make you blind. It makes you want to believe in the good, even when the darkness is staring you right in the face. We faced the worst kind of monster, the one we raised, the one we loved. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it's important that it's heard. Have you ever been betrayed so deeply by someone you thought you could trust with your life? Please, share your experience in the comments below. Knowing you're not alone can make all the difference. And if my story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories from people who have survived the unthinkable.